Welcome to Undercurrents, our daily news show from Unheard's Washington Bureau. Today's guest is Matthew Mehan. Subscribe here, wherever you get your podcasts, and over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. Let's start now by reviewing one of the most famous moments of Donald Trump's 2016 campaign against Hillary Clinton.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
Now, weeks after Trump defeated Clinton, he sounded a different tune. In a November 2016 interview with the New York Times, Trump argued that prosecuting Hillary Clinton would be divisive, that was a quote, and said, "It's just not something that I feel very strongly about." Even after months of rally-goers chanting, "Lock her up," Trump told the Times, quote, "I don't want to hurt the Clintons. I really don't. She went through a lot and suffered greatly in many different ways." Now, this last cycle, however, Trump said a now sort of famous pledge of retribution in his very first campaign rally. Take a look at what he said.
In 2016, I declared I am your voice. And now I say to you again tonight, I am your warrior. I am your justice. I took a lot of heat for this one, but I only mean it in the proper way. For those who have been wronged and betrayed, of which there are many people out there that have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. We will take care of that.
Once again, after the election, Trump is at least seeking to adopt maybe a more moderated tone on this particular question. Here's his recent exchange with Kristen Welker on Meet the Press about what retribution will look like.
You talk about retribution. Are you talking about directing your attorney general to try to go after your political enemies?
When I talk about retribution, I'm talking about fairness. We have to treat people fairly. These people on January 6th, some of them never even went into the building, and they're being given sentences of, many years.
Are you going to pardon those people who've been convicted,
Mr.
President?
At them, and I certainly might if I think it's appropriate. No, it's a very, very sad thing, and they're dividing the country so badly, and it's very dangerous.
Retribution could, of course, mean a lot of things. It could mean fairness and legal justice. It could mean something beyond that. Trump's political enemies are bracing for the worst. Disney reportedly settled with Trump over alleged defamation by ABC's George Stephanopoulos because of fears of legal retribution, according to a report in the New York Times. Now, in a recent report, House Republicans accused Liz Cheney of witness tampering during the January 6th investigation. Trump posted to Truth Social, quote, "Liz Cheney could be in a lot of trouble based on the evidence obtained by the subcommittee," which states that numerous federal laws were likely broken by Liz Cheney, and these violations should be investigated by the FBI. That last part was a quote from the report itself. Now, if confirmed as the head of the FBI, Kash Patel has every intention of pursuing such an investigation. After Trump nominated him for the post, our former guest, Tim Miller of The Bulwark, went mega viral for finding essentially an enemies list in Patel's book, Government Gangsters, which included people from Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr to Joe Biden himself. The incoming Trump administration continues to staff up here in D.C. and is literally preparing right now, at this moment, its concrete plans for retribution, determining how that should be interpreted, who should be targeted, and what it might look like. Matthew Mehan is a professor at Hillsdale College, where he's the associate dean of their Graduate School of Government and a professor as well. He's also the author of some wonderful children's books, including one called The Handsome Little Signet, which you should definitely check out. But I sat down with him here in D.C. to hash out something much more serious, to talk about how Trump and his allies should be conceiving of justice and prudence as they prepare to actually mete out retribution. Mehan is a fascinating thinker who's constantly drawing on some of history's greatest thinkers, from Cicero to Lincoln. You're not going to want to miss his thoughts and maybe some of his warnings on all of this. Stay tuned. Matthew Mehan, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me in studio.
Yeah, it's great. One of, I think, truly the smartest voices on the right, period. There's a lot of talk about retribution. Donald Trump had one of his first campaign rallies in 2024 saying, "I am your retribution." I don't want to get into the politics of that right now. What I want to ask you about, because you have an important perspective on this, is what retribution should and should not look like as thousands of young conservatives, old conservatives come together in an administration right now, this city is bracing itself. Liz Cheney and others are bracing themselves for legal fights ahead, potentially severe consequences ahead. And let's just talk a little bit about what's the wisdom. What wisdom should all of these thousands of Republican activists who are now preparing to take over the reins of the federal bureaucracy, what should they consider? What should retribution look like? Where do you want to begin?
Yeah, I think a kind of a overview of the whole is important because this is a dangerous topic, right? In one sense, I would say maybe retribution. I get a sort of the fiery campaign term retribution. Retributive justice, maybe rectificatory justice. They're going to rectify problems, make people whole who've been injured, right? And sort of solve those problems. There's ways of thinking about it that are high-minded. And that's the key is what's the high-minded path out of this? Because if you don't have one, if you don't have a strategy, both sort of a strategy of justice and mercy that rebuilds peace and concord in the country, right? And it's not laid out by you for both your opponents, for onlooking citizens, and for your own leadership, you are going to get into trouble because there's nothing to stop this sort of being, oh, this is just lawfare again. Yeah. You're going after your political opponents the way Biden went after his political opponents, and it's just tit for tat, and it just escalates into a kind of, Godfather during the baptism, they sort of, go to the mattresses and blood feud kind of thing.
We're a very serious historical precedent you mentioned before we started taping. In terms of late republicanism, you end up with the triumvirate in Poppy versus Caesar and blood spilling.
Yeah, exactly. You get sort of prescription lists and these kinds of problems, right, where people are out and permanently out through, yes, modern 21st century gentle, i.e. we impoverish you, we shame you, and maybe we imprison some of you. But that's not how a democratic republic is going to be able to sustain itself and, frankly, be secure against its own opponents in the globe. If we have these fights internally, we're never going to get our house in order such that we can compete with China and actually sort of keep ourselves safe, secure, and prosperous.
Well, this is a good place actually to ask you to lay out the consequences for not meting out some measure of justice, because Donald Trump is directionally correct that there have been all kinds of injustices. And we could go back to James Comey choosing not to charge Hillary Clinton, saying she's guilty, but we're not charging her. Essentially, it would be beyond us to actually prosecute her. That would just break precedents and norms, and it wouldn't be right. Nobody would bring this case. So what are the consequences? How serious would it be for Trump to come in and say, we're letting bygones be bygones? What should he prioritize?
Yeah, you can go back even further. I remember when Clinton left for George W. Bush and the little jerk interns at the White House pulled the W's out of all the keyboards, right? This sort of nasty bit of vandalism. And I remember distinctly Bush people going like, no, we just let bygones be bygones. And in that sense, you're like, yeah, that's petty. That's disgusting. It's small-souled. But at a certain point, like, okay, this is chump change. Like, we can just move on. But when you get to the sort of high crimes that we're engaged in now, it's a lot darker and more complicated. And I'm not sure it's honorable in the best sense, or rather it's hiding in false honor of like, no, I want peace. I want everything to be just water under the bridge. Let's just move on, quick handshake. And everything's bygones be bygones. Mm-hmm. To my mind, that at this point, there has to be repercussions and there has to be a cost of doing such unjust things, right? But it has to be done in a way that provides a way out for those who are being basically prosecuted and punished. And there's a kind of ethic to all that. But I think we keep saying, no, just let bygones be bygones. Well, but that's just allowing people to become more and more shamelessly impudent and unjust. They're doing horrible things. And there has to be a kind of reestablishment of a baseline of justice. And then, yes, you can wink at smaller offenses and say, yes, okay, a little bit of, mischief there, but we're going to look the other way. But at a certain point, you have to restore order, right? Sort of, New York, right? Crime is too far gone. We need to restore order, and there needs to be a way of going about that. But it can't be broken windows theory where you go after everything. That's a little different. That's the city level, but this is the nation and the federal government, and it's a much more complicated affair.
So looking back at the potential crimes for which Donald Trump would be seeking justice or retribution, however he chooses to refer to it, where would you begin without, of course, I mean, this is like talking about balancing on a tightrope, probably. Where should the new administration begin in order to restore justice, restore order, but without going full banana republic?
Yeah, exactly. At full or even at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way to do it, part of what I think the left has done is almost like a flock of birds defense, where if the predator if the predator is the next attorney general, there's just so many birds in the air, so many insane crimes that just happened that it's like, where do you bite down? Like, and you could get confused by all of the flurry of wrongdoing. There's so much of it. So you have to have a hierarchy of prioritization. What do you prioritize? I think if you understand the health of a democratic republic, in order for the people, right, to elect governors and then to be satisfied that those governors are executing justice such that they can either reelect them or turn them out, there has to be a certain amount of candor. In Republican theory, generally, the founding fathers, but just in the normal operations, you don't even need to go to theory. People have to trust what you say is what you mean, and you do what you say and you say what you do. Yes, it could be in a contract, but it can also just be, I'm going to speak before Congress and explain what my office is doing, what ICE is doing, what the DOJ is up to, what is actually happening at the National Security Council right now, or what did the CIA actually do here and there. And yes, I can't tell you about that, but what I do tell you is rock solid and you can believe me, right? That candor, or the other term, faith, fidelity, where we get the word bona fides, keeping faith with others. Your word is your bond, right? That is so sacred and so important, the operation of a self-governing democratic republic on so many different levels. That to my mind is where you should focus. That's the top violation, i.e. perjury and the subordination of perjury, i.e. the promotion of an arrangement of someone perjuring themselves. That, I think, is where you would focus all of your attention. And sort of like an iceberg, right? 2/3 or 3/4 of an iceberg is under the water level. There are all kinds of corruptions and wrongdoings and evils, right, that you see or don't see and you can investigate and pull out. But the one that seems to me that is so bad is when above the waterline, the part of the iceberg you can see that sinks the Titanic ship of state is people shamelessly perjuring themselves or encouraging others to perjure themselves.
And why that?
Because if you swear an oath, and that is an oath made sacred by God and by the people all witnessing its testimony, and you say, I swear, I promise that this is the truth, either a solemn promise, right, a sort of humane version, or you swear on a stack of Bibles, right, you swear to God, right, you hallow your word and say, that is my bond, and you can take this to the bank, and you can govern by it, you can send troops by it, you could kill people and drone people by it. Like, this is life and death, right? And you could tax people, you could send people to prison. That is so important for any hope of the administration of justice. So because it's the baseline, it's also the top line, right? And if people see people doing this with impunity, and it's public knowledge that people are perjuring themselves, right, and there's no repercussions and no punishment, that example has horrible ramifications for local politics, local business, education, family life, right? Fidelity in all realms, right? That, oh yeah, lying's fine. It's not a big deal. And you can promise up and down and swear to God that this is the truth and it doesn't matter, right? It's required, right? Everybody gets together for government on the grounds that everyone can be friends and you can trust. This is why you want to talk about late republic. Why is it that Caesar wanted to, or why did Shakespeare and Julius Caesar want to dramatize the destruction of Roman republicanism in that act of et tu, Brute, right? You promised me one thing, you guys, you, the Senate, who represent, right, the Republic of Rome, you promised me that you were going to take me and do these good things for me. And instead, in friendship, the equality of friendships, civil friendship, good faith, I'm going to stab you in the back, right? Et tu, Brute, that's the death of a republic, when no one can trust anyone and there's only daggers and men's smiles, to quote Macbeth. Right? It's all like it's all knives out, guns up, and I don't trust anybody. We have to get past that. So if you wanted to get to a place of amity, concord, and peace between the political parties and opponents, focusing on the fact that we can trust each other's word would be the place I would put all the engines of punishment and disincentivize that, as opposed to every other form of corruption, which obviously you're going to have to do some of that and people will. But just as a matter of hierarchy, I think perjury and subordination of perjury is top drawer.
Are there examples that come to mind of people who have committed, high-level people who have committed egregious acts of perjury, the sort of top of that iceberg? Obviously, we've seen a lot of malfeasance among the intelligence community over roughly the last decade through the Russia collusion investigation. Is that maybe a place to begin? What are we thinking?
I'm hesitant to just go, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But the reporting I've seen from friends and colleagues like Molly Hemingway, it looks pretty bad. And I would like, that to be fully fleshed out. I forget which one of them. Was it Clapper said, well, what was I supposed to say? This is a little bit refined, and I'm not saying this is necessarily what you prosecute on, but it's worth noting that you can't quibble when you're under oath. Right? And in fact, what you see quite often is people perjuring themselves in the sort of low-grade way of like, well, Senator, the complicated word parsing, stall for time argument, like, no, that's actually perjurous. Like, that's actually vile. You're supposed to tell the truth to Article 1 body of oversight, and you're under oath to do so. So the whole sort of like, it's one thing to say executive privilege, I will not speak on that. That's different than we have complied with everything, sort of, wink, wink. But no, you can't play games like that. If it's executive privilege, you call it, and you make it clear that this is a zone which I'm not saying because of some legal means or Fifth Amendment. I'm not going to incriminate myself. But if you are giving actual testimony, you should be straightforward. Now, I'm not saying prosecute that, but I just pointed out that we are so sensitized that going after the real obvious grotesque versions is probably important.
So Kash Patel, in his book, a never Trump person named Tim Miller, who's actually been on the show, pulled out a list of the enemies of the sort of deep state enemies that Patel lists in his book. And one of those people is Bill Barr. There are a lot of former Republicans, or kind of Republicans, as a lot of people on the right would say, in name only, that are on that list. So I guess from this perspective, without getting into the specific cases of Bill Barr or even Liz Cheney, I guess I'm just curious if this has to be bipartisan. Does it have to necessarily entangle some Republicans in order for it to avoid looking like Banana Republic or feeling or being in substance like that?
It could be if that's worth doing and it's real. If there is, fire where there's smoke, maybe that's something to do, right? And that would be, in a certain sense, bipartisan. So I think there are opportunities for that kind of thing. But I think it's important, too, just that no matter what is done, it's all going to be cast by the sort of liberal media as this is all reprisals and this is all lawfare, right? Never mind that it was already done once before. We might get admittance that it's payback now in order to frame it more clearly. But part of me says you can't play that game because you're always going to look biased to the media and as they reported. What you need to do is be incredibly rhetorically clear that you are not doing payback. It is not an enemies list. And I think, I get it. There's red meat and people toss around during the election, but you hold public office for us all now. You need to drop all that nonsense, right? And it needs to be very clearly, we are doing justice. We are restoring peace and order. And these are not enemies. These are my future friends.
Why is the distinction between an enemies list and a retribution or payback? Why is the rhetorical distinction between that and saying we're restoring order, these are my future friends? Why is that significant?
You have a duty to both be just and look just. And if you don't look just, you're not just. Because you're setting an example for everybody that justice doesn't matter. And you're letting them think you're okay with you looking like your worst enemies who do play lawfare and do use the justice system unjustly to go after their political opponents for political gain, regardless of the merits of the case. you can't get away with a lot of horrible things if you know that there's serious punishment for lying and you have to cop up the truth of your plans. The other part of why you have to look just while being just, right, is, as I think is a political survival technique, right? It not only is it the right thing to do, which I've argued, it's also very useful, because if you look like you're settling old scores, you don't look like you actually have the American people's interest at heart. You're settling your own personal scores, which is not the public trust. That's not what we ask you to do. And I don't think that's why Trump got into office. Look, there are some people that need to be prosecuted.
Yeah.
Right? That's real. But you have to do it in the sense of, look, this is justice. This is for the common good. This is for their good. This is for that person's good. It is bad to be a dishonest, deceitful, perjurous person. And I don't want you to go to your grave like that. Right? Like that kind of actual Pollyannish, Boy Scout, Americana, Norman Rockwell, we're going to do the law because it's good for everybody, right? You have to have that mindset because you hold the public trust.
If I'm picking up on this, I'm wondering if you're, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you're maybe a little bit worried about the temperament you've seen displayed so far.
I think it's totally appropriate that sharp elbows come out during the campaign, right? The whole sort of like, you'd be in jail, race, that kind of thing. It's like, in one sense, it's hilarious. And, so whether it's presidentially appropriate, I don't actually care at this moment. But it's the idea of like, you know what? Maybe you've done things worthy of prison is a fine thing to say.
Because nobody else has said it.
Right? If it's true, which I think it is. So that's fine. The question is, once the sharp elbows have cleared the room, right, and you've gotten to the top spot, right, what are you going to do now that you are not in that sort of heavy fire, sort of high agon campaign mode? Trump was very chill last time, in a way, like,
Yes.
And I do think he is a, sort of the Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski when they went down, like, he's like, I'm going to give people a third chance, but not a fourth, So I'm actually quite hopeful, but I do think they need to think about it now before they take office, about what is the total plan and what is the total message to send to their opponents. What is the process by which these people can be rehabilitated as well, right? The idea of like, I just want to send people to prison, that's a little short-sighted. Some people might have to go to prison, but there needs to be a kind of general messaging about what is this process that restores the American way of life. How do you want to make America great again? Part of it is that we don't do this kind of reprisal to our political opponents anymore. So you have to find a way to punish while getting off of that sort of carousel of death, right?
Now, this is the most interesting part of your argument. I think you've mentioned clemency, forgiveness, mercy. Is that a critical component of getting off the death carousel?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. And it has to be done just right. And that is to say, you have to sort of lay out the standards by which it must be done right. And because it must be done right, I think it also is another selection criterion for what cases to pick. You put it nicely, something of the most egregious or the most clear type of violations are the ones you would go after. And in one sense, that just makes prosecutorial common sense, right? You go after the easy layup. But it has these other benefits that we should attend to, right? So, for instance, if you're going to offer clemency, you're not going to do what Biden just did with Hunter, right? That's a disaster. That's a scandal, right? What he said is, oh, here for the gun stuff, kind of blah, 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 blah. And for everything else for the 11 years, the sort of very pregnant 11, not a decade, wasn't a round number, right? 11 years for whatever, right? That's not optimal. Now, I get it if you feel like there's a lawfare, you want to protect someone, like even that's colorable, except that we know he's done a bunch of horrible things and he has lied about them, right? Under oath, I think.
The gun charge was perjury, essentially.
Yeah, perjury,
he lied on
right.
a federal form. Yeah.
And that, in one sense, is good. Punishing perjury. The left knows what they're doing in that regard, sort of. They at least know how to look just, if not be just. The further consideration is, if you're going to grant clemency, these people need to be contrite, which means they need to be sorry that they did something wrong and clear about it. meaning I did this and it was wrong. Sort of the Blagojevich kind of Blagos, sort of this was terrible. Like you have to admit it. And if you don't, now what that means too is if you're gonna start prosecuting people, they need to admit to things that are verifiable, separate from them. Meaning it needs to be, look, here's the public. We can show they did X. Now, are you going to admit to this and be sorry for it publicly? Then you can get clemency. Then we can forgive you because you are being restored to us in candor, right? We've reestablished bona fides. You don't have a lot of bona fides. You have, in fact, zero, but you start at zero as opposed to, a hidden or false +4.
You're at zero and the public knows you're at zero.
And that's the best place for you and for us and for everybody. And we forgive you. We're going to show clemency. Maybe you have to serve 6 months. Maybe you do a year under house arrest. Maybe it's community service. Maybe you forgive the whole thing, depending on how high level the person is and how it looks in terms of reprisal against one's political opponents, which, by the way, a lot of these people hide in that. They know that it's bad for the republic to punish their opponents, and so they act with even more impunity. I think Hillary did that, right? She sort of knew.
Joe Biden, I would argue.
Yeah,
too.
I think that's right. But at a certain point, they're not totally wrong, right? It's kind of complicated, but you can still look, we're going to come for you, but there is clemency on you. You don't have to. We don't have to stand there licking our lips and loving the fact that we've got you in prison. We're offering clemency, but you have to admit that you did something terrible. And if you want to play the faux martyr, that's fine. We've got all of the details that have been clearly established in a prosecutorial mode that is clear, clean, and in good faith. And so you want to pretend to be a martyr, that's fine. Off to prison you go. But if you want to say sorry and admit these things publicly, right, then clemency can be offered. And I think that's really important so that people know there's a way out for them, right? And there's a way out for the country where it's you don't get to keep your false honor after lying through your eye teeth, right? And perjurious behavior and subornation and deception, right? Breaking Section 18 of the criminal code, right? There's the federal code. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But you have to, the truth will set you free, quite literally, right? That's what will set you free, right? And I think laying all of that arc out of why we're coming for you, why we're coming for these people specifically, and for these crimes especially with great vigor, and if you're willing to cough up all the bad things you did that we already can show, right? I think that's especially important. Because it's one thing if you ask people to cough up for stuff that you can't prove, that becomes almost lawfare torture. Then people will start spitting up things that might not even be true, and then they're falling on each other and ratting each other out. That gets Stasi-like, right? And it's annoying because you can't prove everything, even though you know sort of reasonably that they did it. But you pick the things that you can show, and then you make them confess it, right? And that's the price of clemency.
If I were to put my MSNBC hat on, I
Please.
would say your theory of the case, your recipe here depends on Donald Trump's rhetoric being measured and being measured and wise. And it depends on Democrats or enemies of Donald Trump being contrite and admitting their guilt. Given the likelihood of both of those things, and maybe Trump is capable of measured, controlled rhetoric on this. He's talked very differently in the weeks since his election, as he did in 2016 about Hillary Clinton, and this time about retribution. He said, my retribution is fixing grocery prices, essentially. It's all of these kind of kitchen table issues. But is that asking to keep the death carousel spinning faster and faster, given the uncertainty of whether you can get a Brennan to offer sincere contrition if he is found of having done something significantly illegal?
In one sense, you have to be just and look just, but that does not mean you have to get other people to be just and look just, right? Meaning all you have to do is take care of yourself. And so each party, I would just say to each side of the equation, you need to be just. That's why I think it's actually really important that it's provable stuff, right? It was you clearly are not being just. It's clear now, right? And so in one sense, yeah, does it mean that some people are going to like willfully go to prison obstinately? Yes. It turns out criminal habituation leads to stubborn stupidity, right? So that will happen. But you know what it's going to happen? How it's going to happen? It's going to happen before the American people, where people say, look, we're giving them a way out. They won't take it. It's on offer. Clemency is right there. You just have to admit to these clearly proven facts that have led to your prosecution, right? And if the facts don't lead to prosecution, then they're out. They're off. And there's going to be a lot of people who get away with it. That's life, right? There's a great phrase amongst the Roman jurists: maximum justice is in fact maximum injustice, right? We're not going for maximum justice. We're trying to get some headliner things that set a baseline precedent that this is the thing you can't do. You can't lie to Congress. You can't lie to the American people. You can't perjure yourself. Your word has to be your bond, right? Because the government has to be trustworthy and hold the public trust. And if it doesn't, we've got an egregious regime level problem.
Fairness.
Which everyone feels that we have because people are lying so much. That's one way out of the MSNBC criticism. The other one is you're relying on Donald Trump to say all the right thing.
Is he the guy to do this? I mean, given his own history of...
The short answer is, I think any reasonable person should rely on Donald Trump to say these things, because he does say things like this, and he did say them last time, right? And will there be the occasional Truth Social slam, right? Yes, it's Donald Trump. Suck it up, Buttercup, and deal with an imperfect human being. But he's capable of this, and his speechwriters are capable of this, and his attorney general will be capable of this. Pam Bondi can do this. People can do this. Kash Patel can do this. They can all do this. They're all very serious, and they care about the American Republic, right? They're not Ahab hunting their white whales, right? These are just men and women. I think this can be done. And yes, part of my answer is yeah, that's why I'm talking to you, Emily, right? I'm getting this out there to help people clarify their thoughts and think through the rhetorical strategy, right? And the political strategy of this, so that the American Republic is restored and that there is friendship across the aisles. And Trump, let's face it, he's a pretty across the aisle candidate. He's more of a huggy bear coalition builder than we've seen in a long time.
But the Clintons were at his wedding to Melania Trump.
Precisely.
Right.
So part of me says he has every reason to want, right, his sort of legacy to be, I've actually sort of healed this hideous division. And I will say this, to basically President-elect Trump, or former President Trump, 45, 47, right? If you actually want greatness, like a glorious presidency, then actually healing the country, you being the president that heals this problem with prudent and carefully measured prosecutorial and clemency discretion, as I've described, or something better, frankly, that you and your greatest minds put together beyond what I'm saying. Like, after being so mistreated and so badly handled, that will be one of the most glorious gems in American history that will make America great. That would be greatness. And it's before him.
He may be the only person who can do it in that sense, because he's intimately experienced it. And it looks more just coming from somebody who's experienced the injustice personally.
I agree. That's nice.
Matthew Mehan, any final thoughts? This has been fascinating.
No, just if you want deeper reading, I'm sorry, the professor.
Please.
Hillsdale College, School of Government.
Please.
Read Seneca's great essay called De Clementia, or On Clemency. Anyone serious about justice and government and peace in this realm should read that. That's a mandatory reading for anybody dealing with all these difficult and thorny issues.
What a nerdy place to leave it.
Sorry.
You can't help yourself.
Nerds rule the earth.
That's true. Matthew Mehan, thank you so much for your time. Fascinating. I love that conversation with Dr. Mehan. He always has the most interesting perspective. Anytime you're able to zoom out and bring in history, it's helpful context. So that was an amazing conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. This is so timely as well. If you are here in DC, the city really is bracing People on the left and the right are bracing. Like I said, Kash Patel's enemy list in the introduction, this was mentioned, includes Bill Barr, a pretty conventional Republican politician, a longtime Republican, whatever you want to call him, attorney, obviously, but he was Attorney General of the United States. He's been around multiple presidential administrations in high posts. So he runs in kind of conservative legal circles, but he's a fairly conventional Republican who's been generally supportive of Trump, but was on that list in Kash Patel's book, and Kash Patel could be FBI director. So there's a lot of tension surrounding what Donald Trump actually wants to do. It's not entirely clear whether he wants to go down that more moderate route where, whatever you think of Trump's first administration, he did not prosecute Hillary Clinton. And he said as much. He telegraphed that right away after the election. And he's doing something similar now in that response we heard earlier to Kristen Welker. But this time around, he's also installing loyalists who feel as though they've learned from mistakes of the first Trump administration, 2017 to 2021. So that's weighing heavily in a lot of people's minds. And there are plans being hatched and drawn up literally blocks away at this very moment. So Dr. Mehan's perspective was super helpful, super timely. Again, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you so much for tuning in to Undercurrents. We are here every weekday, Monday through Friday, and appreciate your subscriptions on the YouTube channel here. Subscribe wherever you download your podcasts, and of course over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show as well. We'll see you back here with more soon.